Greetings from David Gillespie here in South Carolina. Today we're going to do a little video tour of my latest tombstone. Okay, so starting at the top, we have that ever popular, ever interesting hourglass with wings. And one of the first questions I ask children at events that we do when I show them these symbols is I'll say, what does this mean to you? This is a word picture. What does this say to you? And it will always get at least one kid that'll raise their hand and say, time flies. So the hourglass represents time and the wings represent flight. And this was a way that the 17th and 18th century Puritans would have carved this symbol to teach someone in the gravestone, someone in the graveyard, that time does fly, even if they couldn't read. Someone who was illiterate would see this symbol, they would be able to immediately say, yes, time does fly. So I've been carving gravestones for about 20 years now, and I've carved gravestones all the way from New England down to South Carolina. This one's going to go into Virginia. So if you like 18th century gravestones, hand-carved slate type of things, please consider subscribing. It doesn't cost anything, and it'll help us out greatly. What I did with the wings is I used 17th century techniques of creating these facets with these ribs here. So these ribs are basically created to catch light. So it's the same principle as with a letter, is there are two flats or more, and this flat creates the shadow and this flat creates the highlight. And so in the 1670s, 80s, and 90s, these stonecutters were masters of catching what little light they could and using it to create a large, sharp contrast. So unfortunately, you don't see a whole lot of original gravestones from the period with hourglass and wings being the predominant image at the top of the stone. You'll see it tucked away behind a skeleton, or you'll see it on a footstone, but there were several that did depict it as the preeminent design element. So of course this is the classic 18th century shapes top. It has the tri-arch, the two caps, and then the larger semicircle at the top. Now this is what I call a target. I see those a lot in the 1720s through the 40s. I don't know what they were really called in those days, but it's just a way for everything to kind of emanate from or emanate to. So, and then from there, the client desired a rope twist design, which you especially see a lot in classical wood carving as well. So also in the 18th century, you would a lot of times see the first and last name, the full name, on one line, and I think that is more pleasing and it looks more authentic to the period. Okay, now with the date. So to me, I think this is my favorite place to show 18th century flair. And when we go into December, you see a lot of these characteristics in a lot of Henry M. stones and William Codner stones. So they would abbreviate and put a period here, but then have a smaller letter up above. And to me, that it just oozes of hand-carved 18th century. I love that. But this little R right here continues the thought of December or February. And then with the actual numbers, the numbers can always be very interesting. So the basic guideline is here, so the 2 fits within it, but then the 7 creates what's called a descender, so it goes below the line. The 9 is also a descender, or the 6 has an ascender. It comes up to the top there. So I do this because 18th century originals did this almost exclusively. The next thing is these little things like the TH here, 27th or 18th. Those little letters are actually a lot of fun to carve. I have to use a very sharp chisel for these because it's such a small letter. You can see it's, you know, my thumbnail, it will fit both letters on top of the thumbnail, so to speak. All right, and then at the bottom, the client requested a verse of scripture, which we very much are thankful to see scripture on gravestones. So this was very pleasant to carve. So what I did with this is I actually do copper plate pen writing. So I totally wrote this all with a copper plate pen on paper and then transferred it over to the stone here, which I've seen evidence of in the 18th century as well. So these flourishes and things like this were very common in copper plate engravings from England in the 1740s through the 60s. Flourishes will add a lot of interest to the stone. It may be the second thing that's noticeable from a distance. It would be this. This will be first, and it may be this that catches the eye second. And anytime I can flourish an F, I'll take advantage of that, and I'll do it because I think Fs are beautiful to flourish. And then lastly, of course, I always sign all of my gravestones, typically at the lower right. James David Gillespie, Pickens, South Carolina. Abbreviating it with the S period and the little O, just like the February period and the little Y up here. So South Carolina is very much in an 18th century fashion. So someday, if there's some genealogist or student of history cares to know who carved this, they can look me up with this here. It's unfortunate that a lot of the original 18th century gravestones are not signed. And I sign all of mine because every time I see one that's unsigned, I'm very sad because I want to see who carved it. So here's a picture of me once I delivered the stone up to Cattail Run Bookbindery in Winchester, Virginia. You can see all of their great work that they do on the website in the description below. If you like this type of content, please subscribe and leave your comments or questions below. And I'll ask a question for anybody. What, if you're a student of 18th century gravestone lore, what Latin phrase typically accompanies the hourglass with wings? If you know that, type it in the comments below, and let's see what kind of a response we get.